All right, so you're reading Peter Thiel's book.
Peter Attia.
Peter Attia, sorry. You have so many Peters. You're on first name basis with these people. I'm like, I don't know which Peter you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, so it's Peter Attia, and I don't know, 300 pages or something like that, really dense. And so it did grip me because it's very well written. And then it also felt like it was exactly what I needed in this moment.
What's the book about?
Longevity, the science and art of longevity. And so there's a couple of facets to it. There's exercise, there's nutrition. He calls them like the horsemen of like the things that are killing everybody. So heart disease and metabolic dysfunction and cognitive degenerative diseases. And then he talks about what puts us in the best position to reduce our risk of getting those things as we age. So it felt like it was kind of like right on time for me in that regard. I think that's been a question on my mind for a really long time. So I was happy to give my time to the 300-page book. But it's rare, actually, that a book will grab me like that. In most cases, I feel similar to you, what you were saying of, well, yeah, I need the information from this book, but I also need the information from 30 other books in order to do this thing that I'm trying to do in my life. And I just don't have the capacity to spend amongst all of these. I almost wish that there was one other book that was higher level, that was tying it all up, that I could just get access to that one. That's usually where I go to ChatGPT.
I was gonna say, because I mean, like, it's actually pretty deep for well-known books. It's decent with summaries.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I sometimes I despair at the future of long form writing, because I'm like, maybe it's because I've been spending a lot of time on Twitter, and so I have this feeling where I'm like, a useful thought should be distillable into 280 characters.
Mm.
Like, you should be able to condense like a chapter into 280 characters and have that contain the entire message of the idea. Mm-hmm. And then you can spend another like 20, 30 pages supporting the idea. But people have so little time. Like, old school writing used to be this thing of like, let me take you upon this journey. And you don't know where you're going until you get to the end. And so there's this like craft of like artistic argumentation where the writer doesn't want to tell you what it is that they're arguing, because they want to lead you through this surprising journey to the end where they unveil the thing that they're arguing for. And I'm like, no one has time for that.
TLDR.
Yeah. I don't know. So it's like, okay, so the Attia book is really interesting to me because it's like, would you say that it is self-help?
Oh, I don't know how it's categorized by the publisher.
No. And like, you're in your own view. Like, is it actionable advice for people?
Yeah. It's
like
also very medical. And I don't know what genre that is exactly.
Like, he's like giving case reports and stuff?
There are a few case reports in there, but there's a lot of science of, this is how this protein works. This is how this molecule works. There's a lot of talking about different studies and how we know what we know, and how we know that what we know is BS or whether it's actually legitimate. So he talks a lot about that kind of stuff too.
So is it in service of making the point that, like, so you said that it was broken up into exercise, nutrition, and what was the third section?
The structure of the book is actually like all of that is sort of packaged near the end, actually, because those are the solutions. So he actually starts talking about this from the framework of like medicine in an age where we are no longer dying of acute illnesses, but of chronic disease, and how our medical system, like, because this is where his entire story started as a surgeon. So he went through the medical school and went through residency and to become like a surgeon in oncology or something. So it's structured to be like, this is not set up to help us. Here's what's killing us. And here's how we need to take care of ourselves if we want to put ourselves in the best position to not be killed by these things, or to be killed by these things much later in life after having much more enjoyment of the life that we've had.
Interesting. So he's basically credentialing himself as someone who can speak with authority due to his like background and his experience. Then he's making kind of this argument about what is important rather than what used to be important.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, this is the new way that you should live.
This is the new way you should live. And some of the stuff in the this is the new way you should live section, you can do on your own. But there's other stuff that's like, hey, we collectively are going to need to move medicine forward in a different direction if we want to take full advantage of what we know will be helpful. For example, like continuous blood glucose monitoring. Currently, those systems you can only get through prescription, and usually only after you've been diagnosed with some sort of metabolic dysfunction. But the information that that system provides you is useful to every single human being, even if they're metabolically healthy. And so his point is, actually, we should be getting ourselves onto a monitoring system for at least a couple of months to see what foods are spiking our blood sugar levels at what times of day. And then we can start experimenting with that and tinkering with it so that we can have a more stable blood glucose level throughout the day. And we'll feel a lot better as a result, and we'll put ourselves at a lower risk of all of the cardiac stuff and metabolic dysfunction down the road. But he's saying we can't very well all go out and get a blood glucose monitoring system right now. Like, it's just, our system is not set up for this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, like, you'd have to get it to be cheap enough that somebody could just buy it over the counter.
And apparently it already is. Like, it's like $150 a month or something like that is what he was saying in the book. And I guess you can also go through some websites that will like give you a prescription. I'm sure it's kind of like, you know, like the doctors in California on the ganja side of things that are like, you have trouble sleeping. Here's your ganja prescription.
Yeah. I mean, I think that has to be where medicine moves. I actually recently got a blood glucose testing system.
Interesting.
Just because I know that there's foods that affect me, and I've always wondered if it's by way of blood sugar. Mm-hmm. My problem is that I think that the frequency with which you would have to test would probably be like hourly. And you'd have to really carefully log your food, and you'd have to really be like watching how, like, what you eat and how you eat. And so I kind of started logging food, and I realized that it's like arduous.
Yeah.
Because like I signed up for some website. The website is free. It's called like Chronometer or something. And so you type in basically the food stuff, and it already has all the nutritional information. And so it divides it immediately up into macros. But you have to weigh everything.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, you can like eyeball it.
Right.
And so I'm just like at this point where I'm like still building up recipes and stuff inside of it so that I can just be like, I had one serving of this thing that has all these ingredients that you've already listed. But I haven't really gotten to the point where it's a streamlined thing. And I know that I'm so disorganized that if I tried to do like blood monitoring and this at the same time, I just would not. And so I'm like, okay, I have to set up the system first. And then I have to figure out also how to not make the system like encourage disordered eating behaviors.
Do you feel like you're at risk for that?
I feel like everybody's at risk for that. Like if you start really like, if you're looking at like a thing that's like counting your calories and it's telling you like how close you are to like maxing some like daily calorie amount, there's all of a sudden a marker for like, oh, this is how you should be eating. And instead of eating in a way that is like intuitive or whatever, you start to eat on the basis of some set of characteristics. And I'm a big fan of the fact that like you should eat what you want to eat when you're hungry, because that's what's most important. And so I can feel it kind of pulling me in a different direction because I'm looking and like it tells you the breakdown of the nutrients that you're getting. And so it's like you're deficient on calcium, you're deficient on vitamin K, or you've eaten too many carbs, you've eaten too much fat, you've eaten, like, protein is really hard to get a lot of.
Yeah.
Like, super hard. Like, I've realized that I'll almost always eat way more fat and carbs than protein. And so now it's this process of like, okay, well, how does that change the way that I eat and what I eat? And does it matter? Is the fact that it's telling me that I should get this amount of protein every single day important? Or is it just something that I should treat as like, well, this just is how I eat, and I'm not going to worry about that? And so I feel like when you start to kind of obsess about the constituents of your food and the vitamin content of your food, it's really easy to get sucked into that as just this thing that's on the back of your mind.
Yeah.
And so
he did kind of warn about that in the book. Like, it's like one of these areas that it can be easy to get too much data on. And he's noticed like kind of an obsession with data amongst a lot of his patients, because the data is really useful for them to figure out, well, what should I be eating every day, or how should I be exercising every day? But at the same time, you can obsess about it to the point that it's like hurting you more than it's helping you.
Yeah, and so I'm like trying to make sure that my thought is not at all on like weight maintenance.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't think that that's a good way of thinking about diet. And I think that when you start to track stuff and you start to look at calories, it's hard for that not to be something that's in the back of your mind of like, this is the number of calories that I should be consuming. And I don't know. I want to make sure that it's something that I enter into with a clear goal of what it is that I'm trying to optimize, so that it doesn't suck me into optimizing something that I didn't mean to optimize.
Yeah. Yeah, his book is so cool in that regard, because he has one chapter that he calls Objective Strategy Tactic. And he talks about how it's so critical to start at the objective, then go down to the strategy level, then start at tactics. And he's talking about in all of these domains, the exercise domain, the diet domain, most people just jump straight into tactics. They're just like, I'm going to try this. And he's saying, wait, hold on, back it up. Let's come up here. And then let's come up here. So at the objective level, he's like clear on what that is. Like, we want to live better, longer. When we retire, we want to be able to continue golfing, and we want to be able to get on the floor with our grandkids, and we want to be able to go on a trip with our friends. Like, this is what's destroying people's quality of lives as they get older, is that we just lose. It's a snowball effect of losing one thing after another until life is not very enjoyable at all. So we're clear on what we want as the outcome. And then he gets into the strategy level, which is where he gets all the data. Like, that section of the book is the most dense, because it's like, here's how this variable impacts your metabolism. Here's how like a fat tissue works. And here's why we need it, why it's important, how it evolved. And here's when it can get wacky and unhealthy for us. And so he kind of lays out all of this, like, this is healthy, and then it can get to this spot, and this is not healthy. So then by the time you get to the tactic portion of the book, where he's actually saying, put the blood glucose monitor system on you, go outside and do this exercise. By the time we get there, I feel like I'm not even in like the headspace of like, I hope this doesn't give me disordered eating, because I've just gone through like the strategy section that's like, okay, I get it. I need so much protein to keep up my muscle mass. He's saying like we should be eating a gram of protein per pound of body weight, which is significantly more than what is recommended for us. And I always go based on the nutritional label. I'm like, it'll say this tempeh is 25% of your daily, protein. And I'm like, high fives. And then if I do Peter's math on it, I'm like, oh, this is actually just 10%. I actually should be eating, because it's like the protein or the building block things versus the carbs and the fat are the energy portion of things. And so it is kind of imbalanced as far as that goes. So once I know that, then I feel a lot better about like making that decision, because I know that like the decision to eat more protein isn't coming from this like, oh, I want to look better in the mirror. It's coming from this place of like, I don't want to be under muscled anymore, because I know how that leads to worse outcomes over time.
And it's really difficult with protein because you're a vegetarian, and even as a meat
Dude.
eater, I'm like, what the like the amount of meat that I would have to eat in order to get because I think that if you're trying to actively grow muscle mass, it's actually closer to like 1.5 times your body weight.
That's insane.
So that's like anywhere between like what 160 and 200 grams of protein a day
For someone your size or my size.
Yeah, like that's the so for somebody like if it's 1.5, right? So if you're 100 pounds, if you're
100 pounds, it would be 150.
And if you're 120 pounds, it would be 180.
180.
And so if you're 130, it'll be like so basically like between 150 and 200 grams of protein for anybody who's from like 100 pounds to like 150 pounds. So,
and that's like just women, like really, because if you look at men, like men are, 175, 200 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, it's like, I don't know what the fuck to do, because eating that amount of meat, like I think that buying factory farmed meat is completely morally fucked. 100%. I think that factory farmed meat is satanic. And so I make a moral compromise every single day when I eat it, and I don't like it. It doesn't feel good to eat something where I'm like, this is the flesh of a morally compromised animal that has been tortured for the sake of me getting enough protein. Fuck.
Would you feel better if it were grass-fed?
I would feel better if I went to the farmer and I bought the cow.
Okay.
Like, because you can do that. You can do that. But it's like, I think that half a cow, I saw somebody posting about this, is between $1,000 and $2,000 that you drop at once.
But then you have meat for what, a year? More than a year?
Yes. So it's like, it's the investment that you make, and then you're settled. But it's like, I think that it's just the sticker shock of like pulling. It's what keeps people poor, right? Like somebody who can afford to buy a $200 pair of shoes that'll fall apart for 10 years buys the ones that are $10 instead, and they fall apart every 3 months. And then they're right, because they only have $10 on hand at any one time.
Yeah. They'll spend the same money on the shoes in the long run, but it'll be gradual and it'll piss you the fuck off.
Exactly. And that's just how this shit works. And so I'm sitting there and I'm kind of looking at it from that perspective where I'm like, I don't feel like I have the $2,000 to drop on half a cow. But I also know that it's probably a good idea. And so I'm just like, I'm very morally compromised at this moment in time over how I'm eating. And as I'm looking at the amount of protein I'm actually consuming versus what every single advisory says, and I'm thinking about how like I often feel really lethargic and just kind of like heavy. I'm like, that's probably protein, because you can't build the shit that your body needs if you're not getting enough protein, because like you said, they're the building blocks, and the other stuff is the energy for assembling the building blocks. And like, okay, so that's not, you could actually not, that's not true. I was going to say you could not eat protein and still be okay, but I don't think that's true.
Yeah, like, he's saying like he's never met anyone where they needed to eat less protein. Like, he's like, you could eat, you don't need to worry about eating too much of it. You might be eating too much protein when you get to like, I just ate my 8th chicken breast of the day.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just like, who the fuck can afford 8 chicken breasts?
Yeah, or even get it into your that's a lot of chicken. Yeah. Blame it on vegetarians, man. I've been looking at restaurants. I've been like, should I get chicken on my salad? He laid it on me like hardcore, because he's like, hey, it's harder for vegetarians because the protein in plants is for the benefit of the plant, not the benefit of the human. And so it's bound up, and it's like, you can't actually access it. It's not bioavailable. You get more bioavailability when you cook a plant. So I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, because I've also, dude, this is how effed up my head is in this space, is like, I've been feeling guilty for cooking vegetables because like the whole raw community is out there like, eat your vegetables raw, you know? And like, this is like part of the community that I'm adjacent to on this side, are these undernourished raw vegan people who are just, you know, and then at some point they turn into like, I'm no longer vegan, I'm eating chicken livers and hearts for dinner. You know what I mean? Like
There's a reason
really,
for that transition.
yeah, like they're like, I'm so undernourished, give me this fucking heart. And they're just the type of people to go into the weird organ eating thing. But yeah, he's like, if you're a vegetarian, assume that, you know, whatever it says on the package of how much protein is in this, your body is actually only able to absorb 60 to 70% of that. So now on top of that, think about the fact that you should be eating 1 gram or 1.5 grams of protein per pound. Now you need to make up for the deficit of that if you're a vegetarian. And I'm sitting here reading this like, what the fuck, dude? Okay. Now, I was actually like, oh, vindicated. Thank you a little bit, because he's like, if you're a vegetarian, please like at least do whey protein, you know, and do that and so I was like, okay, cool. I accidentally bought whey protein a while ago. And I was also giving myself shit about it. Like, it's not pea protein, it's from animals. And now I'm like, oh, good job.
I mean,
and then
it
also
works.
Yeah, and then I've been also doing bone broth in my soups when I make soups, and so I put a lot of bone broth in there, do it up.
Protein in it?
Some of them do, and some of them don't.
Interesting.
Some of them have quite a lot.
Bone broth protein content: 9 to 10 grams per serving. That's pretty good.
Exactly.
So that's like an ounce is 28, so that's like roughly like 3.5. It's like more than a third protein. It's pretty good.
Yeah, and then I'm usually putting that in a soup that has some lentils, some beans, something like this with more protein in it, some peas. And so I feel good in that regard. And I feel like maybe my vegetarian lifestyle can start to kind of expand more out like this, because like, you know, like I didn't turn into a vegetarian necessarily because of the health benefits. I did it mostly because it just was less complicated than saying, I don't really like meat. It's weird texture in my mouth. It's hard to chew and swallow.
Yeah, it sounds more adult to be like, I'm a vegetarian, as opposed to like, I don't like the mouthfeel.
Right, exactly. And then you get made fun of a little bit, and all right, I can take you making fun of me, but at least I don't get more follow-up questions after that. It's like they accept you. They're like, she's the vegetarian. We're not going to invite her to Vegas.
Yeah, there's a bin.
Yeah, whatever that fucking means to people. They're like, oh, she can only be involved in my life up to this point because she's not going to eat that burger.
Oh man, yeah, that's I think one of the things that for my whole life I've been really careful about not being a picky eater, because at some point my mom I think was basically like, this is a morally bad thing to be a picky eater.
Ooh, I love that point of view.
And I was like, I feel like I kind of take my mom's morality pretty tightly.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know why, because it's rarely like justified. Do you know what I mean? It's just like she's got this collection of nebulous preferences that she's like, this is the right thing, and I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm going to enforce that not only on myself but the people around me. That sounds good.
That's interesting. You know, I feel like actually there's a lot of that sort of wisdom in Eastern Europe. And I'm saying that because like when I go over to Eastern Europe and spend time with Ollie's family, there seems to be like this kind of code of living of like, this is the right way of doing things, but nobody has like a scientific or an articulated reason necessarily why. They just, maybe has been part of the culture and it's always been done a certain way, and it's not creating problems in their lives. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I could see this type of thing being one of those sort of cultural, moralistic sorts of things, because like in human evolution, it's only been very recently that we've had caloric surplus to the point that we could be picky about something and say, ew, I don't want that. And the ew, I don't want that, like, if I give into that tendency or mechanism in myself, it starts with food, but then there's a little bit of entitlement. It's kind of an entitled point of view, you know, or way of being. It kind of spreads outward. And now I'm at a party and I can't really enjoy my friends' parents' cooking because there's something on the table that grosses me out or weirds me out. And I don't have a mechanism to override that because I've just had this soft, cushy life of like, oh, you only like pizza? Okay, here's pizza.
Yeah, it's like we all run the risk of developing the palate of a Ninja Turtle. And it's really, what's interesting is that my mom has a visceral revulsion to liver. Like to the point that she will taste it and she has a gag reflex to it. But she's told me stories of how she's been at people's houses and accidentally eaten it and had to, in the moment, like force it down. And so I look at that and I'm like, that is an exceptional amount of self-control. And I think that that's what I value in it, where I'm like, it's the sense of doing what's right in the face of personal preferences, which I think is kind of like what constructs a world that's worth living in. Because personal preference is almost always to take the easy way out.
Totally.
Like that's my
course, yeah.
I would
of
always
course.
And so it's like I think
I would like $5 million delivered to me while I'm on my couch taking a nap, watching some trashy TV show. Thank you.
Right. And so like I think that I really admire that in her. But the flip side of that is that like I don't know if you remember when we were in college, like how bad my stomach was.
Yes, I do.
And that had a lot to do with the fact that I wasn't allowed to be a picky eater.
Interesting. So you were eating a bunch of stuff that didn't agree with your system and you weren't reading your body's signals because you were overriding them by thinking, I need to eat this.
And it's just like, even today, I go to my parents' place and I feel guilty at the idea of telling my mom, hey, I don't eat this, 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 and this, because she cooks in a specific way. And I don't want to change her cooking. I don't want to tell her how to cook. And so I just suffer through the fact that every single time I go home and I eat her cooking, it hurts. And I'm just kind of like, this is how you express love. And I don't want to fuck with it. And so there's this entire like weird nebulous thing there too, where it's like, well, okay, so obviously the moral choice that I'm making here is to not interfere with the thing that brings her joy because the amount of pain that it causes me is minimal. And yet I've come around to the idea that in my own life, I'm quite restrained in terms of the food that I eat because I'm like, this doesn't hurt.
Right.
Unless I eat too much of it. Like we make tacos a lot. And I have this thing, I've always had this thing with Mexican food where like I will eat until it hurts.
Oh, yeah.
The flavors are just so good.
They're the best.
And so it's like, and I enjoy the process of eating. Like the experience of like, you take the bite and you have the flavors and it's like the way that it, like the entire process of it, I enjoy that deeply. And so with Mexican food, there's no part of it that doesn't feel good until the point is where I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I'm right there with you with the Mexican food.
And it's funny because before I came to college, I never ate Mexican food. I think that you were the one who really introduced me to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're a NorCal baby. That's not like what you guys are known for.
Yeah, I think that we went to Chili's once as a family.
Are you saying Chili's is Mexican food?
Isn't it? Is that Chevy's? Chevy's. We went to Chevy's.
Chevy's?
Yeah.
Okay, like the car dealership?
No, did you guys not have, you must not have Chevy's in Southern California because how could they possibly survive? So Chevy's is this like, Chevy's Fresh Mex.
Fresh Mex, like Mexican or like Tex-Mex?
Like Tex-Mex. I mean, it's
okay.
like, it's like Baja, it's like Baja Fresh, but like.
Like a Rubio's?
No, so it's basically like somebody took TGI Fridays and Baja Fresh and made them into one restaurant.
Isn't Baja Fresh Rubio's? I think Rubio's is Baja Fresh. And I don't know the story, but maybe they bought them out at some point. But okay, it's like a TGI Fridays version of that. Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, like Rubio's and Baja are both like walk in, order at the counter, sit down at the table. But like this is a table service restaurant that serves Rubio's and Baja Fresh.
Oh.
And it's not good. You know, it's like the same, it suffers from the same problem that any chain suffers from, where you're like, this isn't really real food. And it's like the lowest possible quality that you can serve at
this
scale.
Is real food. Sir, this is plastic. You brought me a plate full of plastic.
It's not even that. It's just like, look, I think that real food is food that doesn't have nothing is naturally flavored. Like I'm on a crusade against natural flavors. I think that they're really not good for you.
Are you talking about the thing that's on every ingredients list that says natural flavors at the very end of the ingredients list?
Don't buy anything that has natural flavors in it.
What percentage of this shit that I buy has that on it? I'm wondering.
I bought milk accidentally. Like I have macadamia milk.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't drink dairy. It fucks with my skin, fucks with my stomach. So I bought, I've been buying like coconut milk, which is usually the one that has like the least amount of like stabilizers and fillers. Like it's the shortest ingredients list. And then one time I bought macadamia nut milk because I was like, I love macadamia nuts. And I didn't notice that it has natural flavors on the package. And I can tell that it's making me like kind of bloated and like puffy.
Interesting. Here is a very interesting story as well, having to do a similar topic. Ollie has gotten into just befriending the blue jays. There's 2 blue jays, okay? I think I told you already that our neighbor Bill has been feeding these blue jays with like peanuts that he just puts it in his hand and the blue jay comes. So we were like, this is possible, this is amazing. And so Ollie's been experimenting putting nuts out in this area that we can watch, and he puts the camera there and the blue jays come. And then when we go outside now, they'll squawk at us from a tree. They'll be like, I'm here. And then we're like, okay, I'm going to go get you something. So like one morning, Ollie went, he had an interview for a job, which he got, which is amazing. I know, high five. But so he left, the blue jay starts squawking at me. And so I'm like, all right, I'll go get you something from the pantry. I go to the pantry, I get him some pumpkin seeds. I'm like, he's gonna love these. He's gonna love them so much. I put the pumpkin seeds out. I see him like hopping over. He's like picking them up and he's putting them down and he's trying to decide if he wants them. And then he decides no. And a few hours later, Ollie comes back and my pile of pumpkin seeds is still there. And I'm so confused. I'm like, why isn't he biting on this? Like, these are amazing. And Ollie gives him some nuts and he comes over and he takes the nuts. And then like, we're just very confused. Why doesn't this bird want these fucking pumpkin seeds? Fast forward a couple of days, I'm just going through the pantry. I'm like looking at what we have in there. And the bag that I pulled the pumpkin seeds out of was like, I just never noticed this. I never looked at the ingredients. I'm stupid. I just thought that like a bag of pumpkin seeds was just a bag of pumpkin seeds. No, these things were fried with canola oil. And so it's a bag full of canola oil, basically, covered on these seeds. And I'm like, Ollie, could this be why the blue jay did not want these seeds? Because they're just covered in like, and the oil is still on the stone out there. Actually, like it like leached into the stone. So we have this like stained stone out there with this canola oil. He was like, dude, yeah, like I don't think they want that. Like they can tell, like they pick it up and they're just like, ew, what is this? This isn't food. And I was just like, holy fuck, man. Like, that's so true. Of course, we're not supposed to be eating this.
That's a creepy story. But it fits into the worldview. I'm like, I watched a video of the way that they manufacture canola oil, and it's like a really heavy industrial process. They use hexane to bleach the oil, which is like this really toxic solvent, which they distill away, and so there's not any hexane left, according to the manufacturing protocols. But I just think that it's a food that requires a tremendous amount of processing to get it to the point where it's this like light, flavorless oil. And so it's the product of this massive industrial machine.
Mm.
And I'm like, I think that anything that comes out of an industrial machine, like if you need like multiple solvent purification steps in order to make it edible, it's probably not that good for you. And that's that's the baseline for that's just how I evaluate this shit. I mean, like, I look at ingredients and I'm like, does this contain only food items? If it's got anything that's not food, if it's like weird oils or natural flavors, I'm like, this isn't real. Because think about it, like, you can buy dairy, like butter, and the butter will have natural flavors. Why does
butter will have natural flavors? Okay.
Yeah, like lucerne.
But what are these natural flavors?
They're butter flavors to make it taste like butter, because it doesn't.
But what are they?
So natural flavors are really crazy because most of them are trade secrets, and they're not regulated. They don't have to tell you what the natural flavor is by law. I don't think that they even have to report it to the FDA in terms of like composition. A lot of them are like polycyclic, like ringed molecules, and ringed molecules are generally not good when they're industrial. I mean, they can be not good when they're manufactured by like bacteria too, but like they cross membranes really easily because like do you know like the shape of cholesterol?
No.
So cholesterol, testosterone, estrogen, all of these like hormones, like any kind of like hormone molecule is usually ringed because it needs to be able to transfer across cell membranes. And when you're ringed like that, you're basically able to just like slip in between the borders of the cell. And so cholesterol doesn't need a transporter. It's part of the cell membrane and it can come in and out through the cell, no problem. Same thing with testosterone and estrogen. Like, they have receptors inside the cell that are like on the genes. It's not totally true, but like they have proteins that grab them and they go to the genes and they affect how things are expressed, which is why when you take testosterone, it changes gene expression patterns because it actually gets into the cell and it activates proteins that change the way that the DNA is organized and how it's read and what it makes. And so my working theory is that, like, why is BPA bad? Which is that like plastic stuff. It's bad because, I mean, it's not even my theory. It's bad because it's a ringed molecule that can act like a hormone when it gets into the cells. And so
interesting. So it has more like leverage or something like that.
It is, it's leverage in terms of like affecting bodily function. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you have a compound that can't get across the cell membrane, then it's only going to be able to do damage or affect you if you have receptors on the outside of the cell that are made to like sense it. Like, right. Like cannabis works that way. I don't necessarily think that cannabis gets inside the cells. I think that you have cannabinoid receptors on the outside of cells and they grab hold of it from the blood and then affect stuff inside through this like signaling pathway. But natural flavors are often aromatic. They're ringed molecules. Those are actually called aromatic rings often because they give you smells. They're volatile, like they evaporate at a pretty low temperature. And so that's why you get this, when you pick something up and you smell it and it has like this aroma, that's almost always they're called polycyclic hydrocarbons because they have multiple rings on them. And they're able to like waft away from the surface really easily because they have I think it's called a high vapor pressure. I don't know if it's high or low vapor pressure, but like they evaporate easily.
So when you drive by a fast food place and you can smell it, are you smelling some of the natural flavors?
I think so. Like, I think that when you, like somebody the other day was saying that they ate McDonald's for the first time in a long time. And they smelled it in their sweat for like 2 weeks afterwards. Oh
my gosh, interesting.
And so this happens with food. Like, I know that if you eat a lot of fenugreek, it makes your sweat smell like maple syrup.
Interesting.
And so there's definitely like foods that you can eat that change the way that your body smells. And I don't know if it's the fact that like you're metabolizing and it's getting secreted in the sweat, or if it's activating some other thing that's being produced. Like, I don't know the pathway of that.
Well, do they know what's going on with asparagus? Not with the sweat, but with the pee.
Well, that shit's so fucking fast. Like, I've eaten
dude,
asparagus and like 15 minutes later, my pee smells.
Dude, yeah.
And I'm like, I don't understand it, because this is what makes me feel like I don't think we really understand how digestion works. Because you shouldn't, how the fuck does it get there that fast? Like, if it needs to be digested and we're like, it takes 6 hours for a meal to be digested, I'm like, I don't think that's true. I think that there's definitely stuff that's like happening in the stomach. So as you eat the stuff before it gets, like, if you eat a bunch of natural flavors, all that stuff goes into your stomach, and your stomach is this really wet mucous membrane that's absorbing everything into the blood. And so anything that's soluble that can cross a membrane is probably going to start getting absorbed inside the stomach. But and so I don't know. This is a fascinating open question.
We got to get Katya on to talk about it.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, she's defending her PhD at like the end of the month. I think May 23rd was the day.
Okay.
And so she's gone.
Yeah.
Like,
she's in outer space right now. We'll see her. We'll see her in a bit.
I just like, it's that moment in time was the most painful moment. So she'll be around again at some point.
I love the eye block that you just did. Like, you were like, it was the most painful moment.
I was just like, how deep do I want to? I'm trying to restructure it as not being a painful thing and being, in fact, something that I'm grateful for.
Okay, because right now, are you like resentful of it?
Well, it's interesting because I'm writing the book, and in the book, I'm trying to include experiences that I had, and I don't like the way that I talk about the experience. It's like really negative. It's really just not very charitable to any of the people involved, like myself included, my advisor, like all of the whole system. And I'm like, I don't want to be that type of person.
Yeah.
Like, I want to find ways to look at things that were difficult and to see them in a frame of like, no, it's good that they're difficult, and it was good that it sucked so much, and it was the process of, you know, the seed blooming. And that has to, like, if you think about it on the level of a seed, like, you have this tiny little thing that expands into a plant, and that must be a painful process.
Yeah, look at how painful it is for us to turn into fully grown humans. Jesus.
Like, fully grown anything, like, from a material standpoint, like, think about the immense pressures and stuff that are happening inside, like, because you can look at a seed as it starts to get born. It's like pushing out so fast, and it's growing all of this stuff, and it's like making new tissue, and I'm like, God, that must hurt.
Yeah, or if you look at little birds when they hatch, and they'll hatch in stages, because it looks like it's so fucking exhausting to like have to break out of a shell, and so they'll break out a little bit, and then they'll just be like, okay,
That's exactly it. God, it's like there's so much, it's so prevalent, and it's so universal, and it's like I find it hard to believe that the bird looks at that and then is just like, God, it was so hard. The bird's just like, fuck yeah, let's go. I'm gonna learn to fly next.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we are kind of programmed to forget the pain in retrospect.
But I think that we have the ability to, with our language and the way that we remember things, to prolong the pain.
Yes, that is true too. Yeah, to like hold the grudge.
And I think that it's just really destructive to have things that are painful and not to find ways to integrate them into something that was good, actually.
Yeah, man. I've had a very similar like struggle with talking about the story of my mom. And I would like write the story of our relationship, or just like what happened with her and her illness. And I was just like, I don't think this is this isn't the point of view of somebody who's like fully processed all of this and has like accepted it and has integrated it into every fiber of their being and has come out on the other side of it. Like, that's not the perspective from which I am able to currently share this story. And so I have a similar thing where this sort of drive to inch it along and get to the next frame, like the next reframe of the whole thing, and continue to move that forward along. I don't know if I'll ever get to that, perfect point of I see this the best way it could possibly be seen. But yeah, I'm in the same boat where I know that the way I'm currently or up to this point have looked at it is not that.
That must have something to, for me, I feel like it has something to do with my own failures in the moment. And so what I'm really, really, I guess, resentful of still is that I failed to meet that moment the way that I should have. And instead of looking at it from the perspective of, okay, yeah, I was immature and didn't know what I wanted out of grad school, and that's my mentor's fault. I look at it more from the standpoint of like, well, he was in this position where he was navigating something for the first time in his life. And he didn't know he was under tremendous pressure from elsewhere. And so the questions that I was asking him were not questions that he could consider or even find ways to validate, because the system prevented him from being able to pursue his own curiosity in those questions. And so I think that I was showing up and I was asking things that he probably spent a lot of time thinking about. But because he was so pressurized by the system and by the construction of his lab and the way that all of the experiments worked and the questions that he was asking, it was impossible for him to restructure in that moment to be like, actually, this is something that we should figure out. And this is something that we can focus on. Because I was asking really fundamental questions about like, well, what does this mean? Like, I'm like, what we should be doing is we should be trying to study the effect of our model system versus the effect of reality. I'm like, how does the way that we model this affect the outcomes that we get? And how does it warp the questions that we're asking about biology? And it was just not, it was not the right place at the right time. And I hadn't learned that yet. And so I think that a lot of my resentment comes from processing like how dumb I was for not knowing that that wasn't the right thing to be doing. And then like externalizing all of my frustrations. And so like it's been a process of like figuring out how to integrate my own dumbassery in a way where I'm not like really ashamed of it as much anymore. Because you have to process.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really the same thing with my mom stuff, where it's like there are things that I blame her for that I have to just come to the reckoning of like, there's nobody there to blame. Like that blame is not appropriately placed in that area because, as you're saying, like there was a context in which she was living in that made all of her behavior, like there was a justification for how she showed up in that moment. That makes complete sense. That if I were in her shoes and in that situation, I maybe would have acted much worse. And so it's like this tendency to want to blame a person when really like these are situational factors at play in a lot of these cases that are making people behave the way they behave. And I need to like just accept that and understand that for what it is so that I can move the fuck on with my life. Because otherwise I'm in this victimized place of like, somebody else did something to me. And that's not a place that I can move forward productively in. That's only going to hold me back in every single domain of my life.
And in some ways it's good that you're no longer in the situation anymore, because it's one thing to be able to look at a situation that's in the past and to process it and to make adjustments for how you see the world and for how you encounter that memory and that time and that place and those events, versus being constantly confronted by the fact that the event has not changed. And that you're constantly encountering it again. Like I feel like there's two different things, which is one is dealing with the past, and then the other is then integrating what's happening in the future. And if I was still in grad school and I was still dealing with the guy, I'm like, I don't know that I would be able to get to a point where I understood what was happening, because it's taken me 5 years to get to this point. Like, this is the first season where I'm looking back on what happened 5 years ago, what stopped happening 5 years ago. And I'm finally able to be like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I feel like in terms of, like, to bring it back to the Attia thing of like goals, strategies, and tactics, like the ultimate goal here is to be able to handle situations that I'm not emotionally prepared for with equanimity. Because I have to assume that over the course of my life, there's going to be many, many more of these. And the strategy is, I think, first to figure out how to handle the things that happened in the past and to integrate them and to process them and to cast them in a more understanding light for everybody involved. And then the next phase is to actually be able to take that and to apply it to something that's happening in the moment as you're living, where you take everything that you've processed and you're like, okay, I know that 5 years removed, I can get to this point where I understand this. How do I get it so that it's half an hour removed? How do I get it to when it's 5 minutes removed? How do I get it to when it's in the moment? And that's the coolest thing, because there's this like process of iteratively closing the gap between experience and processing. Because this is like, I think, what meditation is all about, right? Like, this is why mindfulness is powerful, because it allows you to experience the moment as it's happening and to process it, as opposed to giving some kind of other frame to it. Because if you're just underneath the emotion as it's like happening above you, you can watch it and you're like, that shit's going on, but like I'm on this trail, like I have to keep going. So I don't know, it's hard though.
I mean, it sounds beautiful to me, man. That sounds exactly right on. And it maybe even gives some credence to moving things into the past as much as I can that are not good for me. Because I've also delayed moving things into my past because I'm used to chaos and dysfunction in my life, that feels normal. And so it is easier, as you're saying, to process the past than it is to like process the present moment. Therefore, if I'm dealing with some dysfunction around me that I can't figure out how to transform presently, I need to move that into my past as soon as possible so that I can upgrade my software, how I'm looking at the situation, because like the likelihood is I'm not going to be able to figure it out in this particular situation. If I haven't been for X amount of time and the situation doesn't seem to be improving, like I learned that with my last job. Like I was just there way too long, and I can feel the impact, because the longer I'm there now, the more there is to process. So like, that's why it's like, okay, the moment I knew that was bad for me, it's like, ship that off into the past. Thank you so much. Let me process this and move on. But now there's like more junk in the system that I have to work through, because I'm like, oh my God, it was almost 6 years.
Yeah, like the amount of time that you sink into something that you then realize isn't functional. And it's like with families and stuff, it's like that doesn't go away until people die. And then you're left with all, like, I think about my parents dying all the time, where I'm like, what do I want it to look like by the time that they die? Like, what do I want
between you all?
Yeah, because I'm like, there's no way that I can change them. I can't fix them. They are who they are, whatever. That's like fixed and immobile. And so like, what is the marathon that I have to run in order to be able to achieve the relational quality that I imagine is possible? And not just with them, but like with my sister and my brother and my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law and like this new niece that I have. It's just like, holy shit, there's this sphere of relationships that aren't fantastic. And I want to be able to look at my relationships and be like, these are good relationships. And it's not just me who's saying that, but like everybody agrees. Like, I live in fear of being a person who, when I leave the room, people breathe a sigh of relief. Because I know those people. And I can see, like, I can see that I have tendencies that would make me that person as well.
I think we all do, if that makes you feel any better whatsoever.
I don't know. I don't feel that about you. I don't feel that about Ollie. I don't feel that about Shiloh. Like, I have surrounded myself with people who I never feel that about. And I'm like, and so the same way that you would want to surround yourself by people who are better than you in the business world, you also want to surround yourself socially with people who are aspirational, of just like, I wish that I could handle things like this person does when shit gets weird, as opposed to the way that I do. And how can I learn from that?
Yeah.
And so it's like, I always worry that I'm like the most like crippled in the room in that sense.
That's probably just like you did the Clifton strengths yet or no?
They want money.
I know, it's stupid. But like once you get the results, like I will be so intrigued to see how you score in the relationship building zone, because I'm nilch in that area.
Interesting. Yeah, I looked into it and I realized that it was actually like a Gallup poll thing. Did you know that? Which I was like shocked by. I was like, oh, that's so weird, because all their polls are usually free. And so it's this money-making thing that they have that's clearly marketed to organizations.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And
it's a whole thing.
And like, there's a couple of different versions that are like a free version of the Clifton Strengths. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to be as good. So I'm trying to figure out like, what is the cheapest? It looked like it was like $30 or something.
Oh, interesting. I think some of their books are like much cheaper, because like this is how big one of the books is. And this one has like in the back, like this thing. This thing is the voucher. So you just like tear off the thing, and then it has this code in here that you like put into this URL, and now you have a book for keepsies. In addition, and I think this one was like $15, and there's several books that will give you the same thing.
Interesting. Okay, I'll look and see if maybe there's like do you know if can the code be used more than once?
I don't think so. I could take a picture of this and send it to you, and you can see if you can redeem it somehow.
Maybe that'd be interesting. I was just thinking of like buying it used, but if somebody's selling a used copy of it, they've probably taken the code.
Right, exactly. Yeah. There's several books. Like this book is the same thing. It's like one, and then in the back it has the little
Is it a different test?
No, it's the same one. I just got two because I wanted Ollie to do it. And then he did it, but he didn't take the test seriously, because at the time he was like, I hate these tests because they're timed and it freaks him out and all this other shit, right? So I don't think we got the right thing for him. And now he's like obsessed with it, because he's been watching me use it at work, and he's been like listening to me talk about how my strengths are holding me back. And he's like, I need to understand what my strengths are.
That's the most amazing arc. I love those arcs where it's like you're like, you should do this, and the person's just like, yeah, whatever. And then later they're just like, holy shit, I should have done.
I know, and this was like 2 years ago. I got him to do Jordan Peterson's test 2 years ago too, and then we linked our results together and all that. But he was like, I bullshitted that test too, and I was like, oh my gosh, well, like, dude, I don't even know you.
You haven't taken the test. What does it mean?
Who are you really underneath all of this?
The secret's still waiting to come out. Yeah, how's the yoga stuff going?
It's going really good, like, I mean, good and difficult at the same time, because it's like restructuring my focus and like, what am I paying attention to? What am I doing? What am I talking about to people? And like that process is very painful, but it's also less painful than how painful this whole thing has been for the last 8 years. It's been like kind of just constantly painful. And now it's like a different pain that feels more purposeful. And it feels like there will maybe be better outcomes at the end of this. So I'm like in it, even though it's painful, because I'm like, well, what other fucking choice do I have? It's painful one way or the fucking other. That's what life is. and I'm just going to do it.
Hell
That's
yeah.
where I feel.
What does she have you doing this next week?
Right now, so every week there's a writing prompt, which I really appreciate. And the writing prompt is, like last week was letter to a student. So like something that you've always wanted to tell somebody, but you haven't because you're like wanting to be polite and you're wanting to be liked by students, but just get over that and just tell them the hard thing that.
I would love to see that in my inbox.
Okay. And so then what was this week? Oh, this week was like answering student questions. So she was like, go through all of your social media posts, any way that students communicate with you, your email, your inbox, your text messages, and like go look at other people's shit. Like if you know somebody who you're kind of trying to be like, go look at their posts and look at all of the questions that students are asking, put that into a big list, and now start answering those questions. And then like she will be like, and repurpose this on social media and send it to your email list and all of this stuff. And like it's funny because the exercise makes you realize that like these are very basic questions that people are asking, like, what are the benefits of yoga, or like, what should I expect from my first yoga class? Versus like as the teacher and somebody who's been in the industry and is already deep in the rabbit hole, there's like other questions that are more interesting for my brain to explore that my brain would want to spend the day exploring. But then I have to remember that my business is not for me at the end of the day. It's for the people that I'm helping. So I need to actually shift into the questions they're asking and be more interested in answering that. And I still need to be on this side in the area where I'm exploring the things that I'm questioning so that I can stay sort of like as a thought leader in the space. But like these writing prompts are very helpful because I am oftentimes talking about my own story and not the story of the people that I've helped. And I'm realizing like, actually, there's a lot of shit that I can say. And there's a lot of like conversations I've had with people that I never focused on them as like, this is the most valuable thing to pay attention to. It was just sort of like, oh yeah, I had this conversation with Val after class or something like that. But I didn't take that and was like, this is what I need to ship out into the world. This is how I'm going to build my reputation. Like that has all been very elusive. Like, what the fuck? Like, how do you do that? And so she's just sort of helping me figure out that like step by step and giving me the behavioral tools to make it happen.
I love that so much. And it's so true to my own experience because I don't ask basic questions sometimes on the podcast because I'm like, I know the answer to this. But I'm like, that's not who's listening to the podcast. Like I can't operate under the assumption that everybody who's listening to the podcast has the same base of knowledge that I do. And so there's this process of actually having to go, and what I've started to do is I'll have some larger point that I want to get to, but I'll start at the most basic form of the question in order to be like, okay, so this is the basic form of the question. This is how I've answered it for myself. And then from that answer, this is where I've gone. And this is the next question that I've gotten to. And so how do we deal with this new piece on the basis of this old piece? And that allows me to like pull somebody who's listening along where I'm like, hey, this is the most basic question that you probably have. This is how we're going to answer that for the sake of this context. And now that we have the context where you're on board with what this looks like you might have a different answer to the question if you ask somebody else, but like here we're going to stick with this version of it. And then you can build off of that to like do something new without leaving somebody in the dust where they're like, what the hell are you talking about?
Right. And that's the risk that we run when we are like so in our own world, is like we need to like get aligned with our customers' priorities and not our priorities. And that's been really difficult for me to separate out and parse out. Like it's been something I've been able to understand at a theoretical level for a really long time, but how that penetrates like actually my tactical space has been just like a total mind fuck for my entire freaking life, So this has been just a breath of fresh air to have somebody really push me in a direction that feels like it's the right direction to go in.
And it's really cool to have somebody who's external. Like Shiloh and I were talking about this the other day, where it's like he's working on this stuff with Ollie now. And that creates an external pressure of deadline and of expectation. Where he's like, Ollie did all of these tracks, all of these versions, all of these things, and we have a meeting on the schedule. And by the time that we go to that meeting, I have to have something to present, which is iterating on what he's done so that we can move the project forward. And there's this immediate urgency to it that if you're just by yourself in a room and you're like, yeah, I'm working on this thing, but it's like, where's the immovable deadline that is external to you? All deadlines are within you because you haven't found somebody who's going to basically hold your feet to the fire and be like, no, this is going to be done this day. And you have no way of wiggling out of it. And they don't do it by like cracking the whip over you. They do it just by virtue of you've entered into a pact with them and you want to live up to what that pact is.
For sure. Yeah. We have the spreadsheet and our tasks, and they need to be completed by Monday, end of day. And it's so true, because I think a lot of where my discipline on the business side comes from is actually like me also having a work day where there's so much fucking external pressure. It's just ridiculous. You know, like someone could IM you with like, not that this happens all the time, but someone could IM you and just be like, hey, I need this urgently in 30 minutes. And like, the thing that they need is not even something that has on my radar, is something that even existed before you fucking said something. But now I need to drop everything I'm doing to get this for you. I don't like those work days, but I recognize there's some utility in that, in the like getting the fire under my ass of like the get up and go, and having practiced that and having rehearsed that practice under my belt enough times sometimes can help me on the business side, but also sometimes can be a detriment, because if I fill my workday with that, then after my workday is done, I'm like, dude, I can't take more of this. Like, I'm sorry, I have to like push whatever is the most important thing to me, but the least important thing to everyone else. I have to push that thing to, you know, some undisclosed future that hopefully I'll get around to. So the fact that Cass now has this spreadsheet in place is sort of like, not so fast. I know you're really not going to like this. I know you're not going to like spending your Thursday night like this, but you actually have to spend your Thursday night like checking off this checkbox in your business checklist because you're meeting with Cass on Tuesday.
And that's the worst part of being somebody who's starting their own enterprise. Because your results are directly related to how hard you're going to work. And it's really hard to, when there's nobody who's like, here's the checklist. It's just like, yeah, I can make my own checklist, but I'll fuck off. I'll just be like, I can finish that tomorrow.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if like that means, you know, I'm thinking a good next step for me will probably be getting some sort of an assistant. And I'm not at that point yet, but I could see myself getting to that point in a couple of months. And I'm like, could I use that as this external pressure thing? Because now my assistant would know like, hey, every morning I need to post X, Y, or Z on social media. Therefore, I know that I need to get that to my assistant by 6 a.m. every day. And can I build that into my thing a little bit and sort of create that external pressure for myself that way?
Remember we had that conversation about like, what do we owe the rest of the world? I think that this is what that question is really about, which is, how do you create things that you owe the external world in a way that it pushes you along the path that you want to be going down, as opposed to like pulling you down a sucker trip? Where it's like you have obligations when you go to a job to the outside world, and they force you into a higher level of performance than if you didn't have those obligations. And so when you're working on something by yourself and you're very insular and you're the only person who you're answering to, you've created a situation where you've removed the pressure from yourself almost entirely. And so it's easier to feel, I don't want to say rudderless, but less directed.
Yeah, for sure. And fulfilled too. I think like that feeling of being needed by like somebody else needs me to deliver something. even if I'm paying that person an hourly rate to tell me, Brenton, I need you to do this thing for me, is ultimately the thing that makes me feel like, okay, everything I'm doing has some purpose to it. And so it makes me want to keep going. And sometimes that is the hardest part of this yoga thing for me, is like, I can feel that there's some potentiality to it. Like, this could be so fucking helpful to people. And I can see the ways in which it's been a little bit helpful to some people so far. But I don't have that feeling because nobody else has that pressure or is like asking me for this stuff, like pulling it out of me. It feels like, well, fuck, this is useless. Like, am I just doing this for myself? And then I get in my head wrapped up in this because I'm like, well, if I'm just doing it for myself, why would I do that? I can just practice yoga. Like, that's me. That's for me.
Oh man, you're so right. And it's really, like, on one hand, it is for you too, because I feel like when you're making something, there's this process of reinventing yourself along the way of making it, that, like you said, there's a difference between the basic questions that somebody's asking that you've already answered for yourself versus the thing that you're working on. But you're trying to create a pipeline where you're taking people from the basic question to be interested in the answer that you have for the most complicated question. And so it's like, you have to have a good answer for the most complicated question. So if you start with like really simple yoga and somebody's devoted to it, the next thing, there's a pipeline of desires that people have, which is like, okay, I have this really fun, this basic practice, and what are the other ways in which I have to integrate my life around it in order to make it something that is resonant from the smallest to the largest. And that's something that you have to have figured out. That's fucking crazy. That's fucking crazy. Yeah. You have devoted yourself to the fact that your arc is being the one who's like, I will take you on this ride.
Yes. And Cass is also helping push me to like figure that arc out, like figure out what exactly is this pipeline, because I've been waffling for a really long time and I've been insecure about my knowledge for a really long time because I come from, my background is not what you would think a background should be for like a professional fitness person or a professional, I don't know what you would call a yoga person in the professional world, to be honest.
Fitness instructor.
Yeah. So like I don't have the background that you would think somebody would have for it. And so I often will get in my own way because of that. And the insecurity or just like lack of pressure of somebody saying like, no, create this pipeline where people move through and there's some transformation at the end of it. I have bits of that, right? Like I have components or building blocks of that, but I haven't actually taken the time to be like, let me figure out what the system actually is for every single individual who flows through this pipeline. Like, what is the system for this person and then this person and then this person? And this, I feel like, is what she's trying to have me figure out right now through all of these different writing prompts.
And it's almost like you said that the Attia book is exactly what you needed at right this moment. And it seems like that frame for like, you start with get rid of your pain and then you end with live better longer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you're backed by the science that you've read in all of these books and all of these places, and you've assessed it and you've integrated it into your own life and you've figured out what is good advice and what is just pablum. And so you're able to throw away the stuff out of his book that you're like, that shit doesn't work. But this stuff does, because I've tried it, I've experimented, and I can pass it along to you. And so you're running these like two separate wheels that have to be geared into each other, where one is the wheel of like, let's do the super basic stuff. And then you're like in the background working out the less basic stuff for yourself, because you don't know yet. I don't know yet. I don't know the science stuff. Like I'm writing this book and I'm like, oh my God, who do I think I am?
Right. Yeah. I'm trying to put out social media posts that are like, here's how you can fix your back pain. And I'm just like, how do I make sure that I say this in the most responsible way possible? And there's a lot that goes in there to be able to answer a question responsibly. And then it's like, well, who's asking the question? Because the answers could be different for this person than this person. You know, like there's all of these different nuances that need to be accounted for here. that, you know, if I didn't have Cass pushing me on this stuff is like the most painful stuff that she's pushing me through, I would avoid it.
Yeah, because you're like, there's lots of other stuff that I can do.
Right.
I could do the other thing. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'll get to this later.
Exactly. Last week she was like, you made us go on Instagram Live. You know what I mean? Like, there's no fucking way in hell I would have ever made myself do that, because I would have been like, oh no, well, this other thing is also going to move my business forward. And it's also, you know, I'm like, have the self-deception justification going on. That's like, you're doing the right thing by avoiding the things you're scared of. And I'm like, thanks, man. You never lead me astray.
I love that. All right, I gotta go. You wanna give us like a sentence wrap? You wanna like lead us to the next? Not like not actually rapping. I mean like wrapping paper.
8765431. I don't know what you want me to say. That's my wrapping up. I'm like just wrapping down.
All right, excellent. See you next week, Betsy.
Sounds good.